Close your eyes and picture this. You're sipping watered-down wine on a busy Roman street, squeezed between beggars, rats, and wagons thundering past. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of waste. Suddenly, a cart tips over, shouting erupts, and you're dodging piles of refuse and angry merchants just to stay on your feet. That's not the end of your problems. It's barely breakfast. The Roman Empire was gritty, grand, and absolutely unforgiving. Life for ordinary people meant sandals, sewage, and a daily struggle for survival. And that's just the start. The real test begins as soon as you open your eyes tomorrow morning. Morning starts with the sound of life pressing in from every wall and floorboard. You're not waking up in a cozy nook, but in a cramped room high up in a Roman insula, a multi-story apartment block that's more about squeezing bodies in than keeping anyone comfortable. The stone walls sweat in the summer, freeze in the winter, and do nothing to keep out the noise. You hear prayers, arguments, a baby wailing, and the steady thump of feet on the stairs. If you're lucky, nothing has leaked through the ceiling overnight. If you're not, you might find a fresh drip from a neighbor's spilled wine, or something less pleasant. The air inside is thick, and not in a good way. It's a blend of smoke from oil lamps, mildew, and the ever-present perfume of unwashed humanity. But the real punch comes from the open gutters just outside, doubling as sewers and fed by chamber pots emptied from windows above. That's your alarm clock, the city's waste, swirling just beyond your door, reminding you that privacy and fresh air are luxuries for someone else. You roll off your straw mattress, careful not to disturb anyone else squeezed into the same room. Space is so tight, you might be sharing with family, or even strangers if the rent's steep. The higher your floor, the more the building sways. Everyone knows fire is the worst-case scenario. Cooking inside is banned, so you're stuck with cold food in the hope that nobody's dropped a lamp in the night. First task, deal with your own chamber pot. There's no plumbing, no private bathroom. You haul the pot down a narrow, rickety staircase, dodging your neighbors doing the same. Some mornings, your foot slips on a damp step, and you have to hope it's just water. The street below is already streaked with runoff, and every resident adds their own contribution. If you're unlucky, you might get splashed from above. That's just part of the morning routine.
Maybe you try to avoid the gutter and make for the public latrine instead. Don't picture anything private or clean. The Roman latrina is a long stone bench with holes, everyone shoulder to shoulder, no partitions, no secrets. The trough below carries waste away, but not fast enough. You sit, and the only thing separating you from the next person is a little space and maybe a nod of acknowledgement. Conversation happens here. Business, gossip, complaints about the city. You clean up with a communal sponge on a stick, the tersorium, dunked in a shared bucket of vinegar or salt water. The idea is to rinse it between uses, but you try not to think about how many hands have been there before yours. There's no soap, only a quick rinse at a communal basin, and then you're done. With your dignity slightly diminished, you head back out to find something, anything to eat before the workday truly begins. Breakfast isn't a highlight. You're not sitting down to eggs or fruit or anything soft. You get panis rusticus, a dense, rough loaf of bread baked up to 2 days ago. It's chewy, gritty, and hard enough to double as a weapon. You break off a chunk and dip it into watered-down wine, trying to soften it enough to chew. The wine isn't for pleasure. It's diluted to keep you from getting drunk before noon, and because plain water isn't always safe to drink. The alcohol is supposed to kill off whatever might be lurking in the communal fountain water. You eat squatting near the fountain, surrounded by others doing the same. Someone's rinsing laundry a few feet away, and clay jars clatter as neighbors fill them for the day. If you have a little honey or olive oil, you count yourself lucky. Most days, it's just bread and wine, enough to keep you moving, not enough to enjoy. The meal is quick, practical, and eaten on your feet or perched on a stone. You keep an eye on your surroundings. There's always a chance someone spilled something nearby, or that a stray dog is eyeing your breakfast.
Light doesn't do you any favors in the insula. Unless you're near the door or a rare, narrow window, your room stays dim even after sunrise. Lamps are expensive to fuel, so you squint and hope for the best. The gloom is just another part of life here, and you get used to stumbling around half blind until you step outside. When you finally do, you squeeze into the street with everyone else. There's no relief from the crowd. The city is already awake, and the streets are packed. Vendors shout as they set up, animals jostle for space, and the noise is constant. The smell changes. It's sharper, more aggressive, a mix of trash piles, manure, and the damp tang of the open sewers running along the curb. You dodge puddles and piles, never sure what you're stepping in. Inside the insula, it's still chaos. Overcrowding means every movement is a negotiation. Kids dart between legs, elders grumble, and the thin walls carry every sound. Privacy doesn't exist. You do everything, eating, washing, arguing, in public, or in earshot of at least a dozen people. Even breakfast is work, softening bread, rationing wine, and shifting on uneven stones as you eat. There's no time to linger. The city demands your attention and your energy. Every morning chore, emptying the pot, finding food, washing up, is a reminder that survival here is about getting through the basics, nothing more. You steel yourself for what's next, because stepping outside isn't just about leaving your building. It's about entering a world where the hazards multiply and the pace never slows. You take a breath, brace yourself, and step out into the city. The street greets you with a new set of challenges, noise, crowds, and a whole lot of unpredictability. You step into the heart of Rome's streets, and the city wastes no time reminding you how little it cares for your comfort. The first thing that hits you isn't the crowd, but the air. A sharp, living mix of smoke from cooking fires, incense drifting from temple doors, manure, and the ever-present tang of public latrines. It's a cocktail that seeps into your clothes and hair, and you can't help but wonder if you'll ever get used to it. There's no such thing as a safe path. Forget about sidewalks or painted lines. You're thrown into the same uneven, cobbled stretch as everyone else. Laborers hauling bricks, goats heading to market, stray dogs fighting for scraps, and wagons loaded with everything from sacks of flour to amphorae of olive oil. Whoever's biggest or in the biggest hurry gets the right of way. If you're not paying attention, you're in the way. Gutters double as open sewers filled with human waste, animal droppings, and whatever runoff the city has to offer. With every step, you're just one misjudged move away from baptizing your sandal in filth. The raised footpaths offer a little protection, but they're crowded and narrow. Step off, and you're ankle deep in a mixture that's been fermenting since last week. The street isn't just dirty, it's alive with hazards. Spilled garum from the fish markets coats the stones, smelling like fermented fish waste and turning the ground into a slippery trap. If you lose your footing here, you're not just embarrassed, you're soaked in something you'd rather not identify. The crowd itself is unpredictable. A wagon tips over and suddenly you're dodging rolling jars and angry shouts. A goat slips its leash and barrels through, nearly taking you out. You might be clutching a parcel or a basket, but good luck keeping it intact. The only rule is to keep moving and try not to make eye contact with anyone who looks like they're having a bad day. Every errand feels like an obstacle course, and the finish line is never guaranteed. And then there are the surprises that drop in from above. Chamber pots, emptied from windows without warning, add a new layer of risk. You learn to watch the ground for puddles and the sky for flying trouble. Sometimes it's not just waste. Rotting trash, broken tiles, or even a stray sandal can come sailing down. On the street itself, dead animals are left to decompose until someone finally drags them away. The city's sanitation crew is more of a rumor than a reality. The hazards don't stop at the physical. Rome's streets double as stages for public drama. Political parades clog entire avenues, banners waving and musicians blasting out tunes as some senator tries to outdo his rivals. You're stuck, pressed up against strangers, waiting for the parade to crawl past. If you're lucky, you catch a few coins tossed by a generous official. If not, you just get elbowed in the ribs. Public brawls break out without warning. Maybe two merchants arguing over stolen goods. Maybe someone had too much wine and picked the wrong fight. You could be in the wrong place at the wrong time, dodging fists or scrambling out of the way as the crowd surges. What other surprises lurk on these streets? Protests are a regular feature. A bread shortage, a spike in olive oil prices, or rumors about a corrupt official can turn a busy intersection into a shouting, shoving mass of people. There's no police line, just a wall of bodies and a lot of pushing. You might get swept up in it, shoved into a pile of garbage, or find yourself face to face with someone else's bad day. There's no such thing as personal space, and every outing is a gamble. Injury is never far away. Maybe you trip on a loose cobblestone, scraping your hands as a cart rumbles by inches from your head. Or maybe you slip on a patch of spilled garum, arms flailing as you try not to land in the gutter. Even if you avoid the obvious dangers, there's always the chance of getting caught between a wagon and a wall, or being clipped by a load carried by a distracted porter. After dark, the risks multiply. Heavy carts, banned during the day, thunder through the streets at night. With no streetlights, you can't see what's coming until it's nearly on top of you. If you're out late, every shadow hides a new threat.
The city's soundtrack is relentless. Vendors shout over each other, trying to sell bread, olives, or cheap wine. Dogs bark, children cry, and somewhere, a street performer tries to drown out the rest with a battered drum. The air is thick, and not just with noise. Smoke from fires and the stench of public latrines mix with the sharp tang of fermenting garbage and spilled wine. It's a smell that clings, following you everywhere. A reminder that Rome is always just a little bit out of control. Despite all this, you adapt. You learn to sidestep puddles, duck your head when passing under windows, and keep your hands close to your pockets. You get used to weaving through crowds, reading the flow of people, and knowing when to wait and when to push forward. It's not about thriving, it's about surviving, about getting where you need to go without adding a new bruise or stain to your collection. Every trip outside is a test, and the city never makes it easy. You might reach your destination, but you're never sure what you'll look like when you get there. Sometimes it's a scrape from a fall. Other times, you're just a little filthier than when you left. There's no guarantee of safety, just the hope that you'll get through the day in one piece. And all this is just the commute, the real work. The part that actually puts food on your table hasn't even begun. The city may be a gauntlet, but what comes next is even tougher. The day's labor is waiting, and Rome isn't about to slow down for anyone. Your day's work in Rome begins before the first hint of sunlight. The city is still half asleep, but you're already at the job site, yawning through the morning chill. Spread across construction sites and workshops, overseers often carry a staff to enforce punctuality.
just in case anyone thinks about sneaking in late. If you show up even a few minutes behind, you risk losing part of your already meager pay, getting yelled at in front of everyone, or maybe worse. There's no gentle warning, no try harder tomorrow. Get fired, and that's it. No money, no bread, and no one lining up to help you. You don't have the luxury of choosing your work. If you're a bricklayer, you spend your day hauling heavy clay bricks across uneven ground, sweat running down your back before breakfast is over. The foreman is watching, barking orders, and he's not interested in your excuses. If you slow down, someone younger is ready to take your spot. The bricks are rough, the ground is worse, and your hands are raw by midday. Gloves? Unheard of. Helmets? Those are for soldiers, not for people like you. Every load is a gamble. Will your grip hold, or will you slip and crush your foot? How long before your body simply gives out? If you draw the short straw and end up as a sewer worker, the job is even more punishing. Most people try not to think about what's flowing beneath Rome's famous streets, but that's your office for the day. You wade through knee-deep sludge, shoveling muck and keeping the city's waste moving so it doesn't pile up and drown the streets. The smell is everywhere, sticking to your skin and hair. Rats scatter at your feet. Your sandals are soaked, and you can feel the filth between your toes. No one thanks you. People barely look at you, unless it's to wrinkle their nose and hurry away. Injuries are a given. Maybe you trip on a loose stone. Maybe a brick slips and lands on your hand. Maybe the sewer water finds a cut you didn't know you had. There's no first aid kit. If you get hurt, you wrap it in a scrap of cloth and keep working. Infection is a constant threat. Even a small cut can turn ugly fast, swelling up and turning red. Miss too many days, and your job is gone. No one's going to wait for you to heal. Most people just keep going, hoping their bodies hold out a little longer. Lunch, if you get one, is quick and silent. You find a spot to sit, maybe on a broken wall, maybe in the shade of a half-built shop, and eat whatever you brought. Usually it's a hunk of stale bread, a handful of olives, maybe a fig if you're lucky. Water comes from a clay jar, and you hope it's still cool. There's no time to relax. The foreman wants you back at work, and you spend the whole break watching him pace, waiting for the signal to get moving again. If you're a sewer worker, you eat with the smell of waste still clinging to your clothes. If you're a bricklayer, you eat with your hands still covered in dust and grit. Either way, the food never tastes like much. Women work just as hard. If you're a woman in a working-class family, you're spinning wool or weaving cloth at home, then packing up to sell it at the market. Maybe you're selling vegetables, shouting over the noise of the crowd, or running a stall while keeping an eye on your children. You manage the house, cook the meals, and try to stretch every coin as far as it will go. There's no break, no real moment to yourself. Every bit of work you do is the difference between scraping by or not. The day is a blur of chores, errands, and noise. By the afternoon, the sun is beating down, and your clothes are stuck to your skin. Your arms ache from lifting, your feet are sore, and you can feel new blisters forming. You keep going because you have to. The city doesn't slow down, and neither can you. If you're sick, you show up anyway. If you're tired, you push through. No one else is going to take care of your family if you quit. As the day drags on, the work doesn't get easier. The foreman is always there, watching, ready to shout if you stop moving. There's no such thing as a day off. If you're lucky, you finish before sunset. If not, you keep working until the job is done. The only thing that matters is staying on your feet and getting through the day without losing your place.
When you finally head home, you're dirty, exhausted, and still thinking about tomorrow. Your hands are cracked and sore, your back is tight, and you're already worrying about whether you'll have enough money for bread and oil. The city is still noisy, but now it's a tired noise. People heading home, animals calling out, the last wagons rattling by. You count your coins, hoping they'll last until the next payday. You make it back to your insula, climb the narrow stairs, and drop onto your straw mattress. There's no real rest. Every muscle aches, and you know you'll have to do it all over again in a few hours. But before you can even think about sleep, you need to eat. And if you're hoping for a warm, comforting meal after a long day, Rome has other plans. Dinner in ancient Rome for the working class meant pulse, a porridge made from spelt beans or lentils. This was not the kind of meal you'd ever crave. The texture was famously compared to wet gravel, and if you were lucky, maybe there was a faint trace of herb. Most days it was just bland gray mush, designed to fill your stomach and nothing more. There was no artistry, no family recipe. You'd scoop it from a battered bowl, steam already fading, and try not to think about what else might be lurking in the mix. Next to the pulse sat a chunk of panis rusticus, a rock-hard loaf baked up to 2 days prior, dense enough to double as a doorstop. This bread was rough, chewy, and full of grit from the millstone. You'd have to tear off a piece and soften it in wine or dunk it straight into your porridge, hoping it wouldn't chip a tooth. It wasn't about enjoying the crust or savoring the crumb. It was about getting enough bulk to keep you upright through tomorrow's labor. Could a spoon of garum really improve that porridge? This was the question every Roman asked themselves as they eyed the jar. Garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce, was the go-to condiment if you could afford a splash. The moment you pried off the lid, the smell, like dead ocean and brine, would hit you. It was strong enough to clear out a room, but you'd drizzle it on anyway, hoping for something different. Sometimes it masked the blandness, sometimes it just made things worse. Its aromatic horror clung to your hands and clothes long after the meal ended. Fresh vegetables were rare. Your pulse might have a few beans or lentils, but anything more colorful was a luxury. Garlic or leeks could show up for a bit of bite, but forget about tomatoes, potatoes, or anything sweet. Those hadn't even arrived in Rome yet. There was no sugar, no chocolate, no coffee. If you wanted dessert, you'd have to hope for a drizzle of honey, and that was expensive. Most nights, you just stared at your bowl and tried not to think about what was missing. Meat was almost mythical. If you managed to get any, it was preserved, heavily salted, smoked, or drowned in garum to keep it from turning. Even then, the taste was more salt and fish than anything else. The cuts were small, tough, and sometimes a little off, but you ate it anyway. The risk of food poisoning was real, but hunger always won. For most, protein came from the endless legumes in your pulse, not from anything you'd see roasting on a spit. Hygiene was an afterthought. There were no napkins. You wiped your hands on your tunic, or, if you were lucky, a communal rag that had already seen too many dinners. The smell of garlic and fish sauce lingered on your fingers, in your hair, and on your breath. It was just part of life. Nobody expected to finish a meal feeling clean. Privacy was another thing you did without. Most working-class Romans ate outside, on a step, beside a fountain, or standing in the street. You crouched or squatted, sharing space with neighbors, strangers, and the city's stray dogs. Conversation was minimal. Mostly you listened to others chewing, slurping, or arguing over the last bite. Someone always managed to drip garum onto their bare feet or burp before the bowl was even empty. It wasn't a family dinner. It was survival in public. If you wanted a change, you might grab a meal from a thermopolium, one of the city's street food stalls. They served hot food, but the menu was just as basic. Another bowl of pulse, maybe a stew, and the same rock-hard bread. The prices meant this was more of an occasional treat than a nightly escape. You'd stand in the smoky doorway, eat quickly, and get out before the next customer elbowed in. The absence of variety was everywhere. No pizza, no pasta, no fresh fruit salad. The food was repetitive and plain, and everyone knew it. Still, you ate because you needed the calories, not because you wanted the taste. You learned to ignore the blandness, to chew past the grit, and to swallow before you thought too much about what you were eating.
Dinner was over when your bowl was empty and your stomach felt heavy. You'd wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, pack up what was left, and move aside for the next person. There was no lingering at the table, no sharing stories over dessert. The best you could hope for was that you'd eaten enough to sleep through the night. As dusk settled over the city, you might pause for a moment, listening to the sounds of the street. The clatter of bowls, the splash of water at the fountain, and the distant shouts of vendors closing up shop. There was no comfort in the meal, but there was routine, a kind of tired acceptance that this was just how things worked. But when Romans needed to forget the taste of pulse and the weight of another day, they didn't look for comfort in food. They went looking for distraction, something loud and unforgettable. And in Rome, that meant entertainment on a scale and with a level of violence that would shock most modern crowds. You find yourself wedged into a stone seat at the Colosseum, the midday sun beating down and the noise already swelling around you. Tens of thousands have packed into this place, from the richest senators to the poorest laborers, all eyes locked on the arena below. Vendors squeeze through the aisles, hawking watered wine and stale bread, but nobody's here for the food. The real draw is what's about to happen in the sand. The Colosseum isn't just a stadium, it's a statement. Rome built it to show off power, engineering, and control. The events are free, but that's not generosity, it's strategy. If you're busy watching what happens here, you're not thinking about your next meal or the latest tax hike. You're not plotting rebellion or grumbling about crowded insulae. Instead, you're waiting for the opening procession, craning your neck to catch a glimpse of the emperor waving from his private box. He's untouchable, perched above the chaos, and his presence alone is enough to whip the crowd into a frenzy. Gladiators march out, armor glinting, faces set. Some are professionals trained and sponsored, but most are slaves, prisoners, or criminals. Each one knows what's at stake. The crowd starts picking favorites, shouting bets, coins changing hands. The noise is deafening, a wall of sound that drowns out any second thoughts. When the fighting starts, it's fast and brutal. There's no choreography, just flesh, steel, and desperation. Swords bite, shields splinter, and the sand darkens with blood. The cheers get louder with every wound. Could you cheer when someone fights for their life? Here, people do, swept up in a shared hunger for spectacle. The fight isn't just a contest of skill. For some, it's a death sentence. A lucky few might win freedom, but most won't leave the arena alive. When a gladiator falls, the crowd decides his fate with a simple gesture, thumbs up or down, life or death. Sometimes you clap before you even realize what you're applauding.
But the violence doesn't stop with men. The Colosseum craves variety, and animal hunts are next. Lions, bears, and leopards, shipped in from every corner of the empire, are set loose, sometimes against each other, sometimes against men with nothing but a spear. The crowd watches as a lion leaps, jaws snapping, or a bear swats a man aside. These animals are trophies, proof of Rome's reach. But in the end, they're just another casualty for entertainment. If you think that's the worst of it, public executions are waiting. Justice here isn't quiet or private. The condemned are paraded out, sometimes dressed as characters from myths. Maybe a man plays Prometheus, chained to a rock as a real bird pecks at him. Maybe a group is thrown to the beasts, unarmed, their deaths drawn out for maximum effect. The crowd doesn't look away. They cheer, jeer, and learn the lesson.
The state decides who lives and dies, and mercy is rare. On special days, the Colosseum becomes something else entirely. Roman engineers, who designed complex drainage systems beneath the arena, flood the floor, turning sand into a shallow lake. Crews haul in real ships, and a naval battle begins. Arrows fly, oars clash, men fall into the water and don't come back up. The logistics are staggering, but the crowd only cares about the drama. Every drowning, every sinking ship is another story to retell. Rome's engineering is impressive, but the spectacle is always about danger. If you're not a fan of blood and sand, the Circus Maximus offers a different kind of thrill. Chariot races are the main event. Teams of horses thunder around the track, drivers standing in fragile carts with no guardrails, no helmets, nothing but luck and skill between them and disaster. Crashes are frequent, wood splinters and bodies tumble across the dirt. The crowd goes wild for every wreck, every close call, every horse that stumbles and doesn't get back up. Betting is everywhere. Money, food, even clothes changing hands on the outcome of a single lap.
It's not only the big venues that offer a show. On the city's streets, fire breathers, acrobats, musicians, and hustlers compete for your attention. Some days, a philosopher sets up shop and rants at passers-by, hoping for a coin or a small crowd. The chaos is constant. You can't escape spectacle even if you want to. All of this, the blood, the noise, the endless parade of bodies, serves a purpose. Rome weaponizes entertainment. It's not just about distracting the masses. It's about shaping what people see as normal. Violence becomes routine. Horror turns into something you clap for because everyone else is clapping. You might not even realize how much you've changed until you find yourself cheering as someone falls or laughing at a crash that leaves a man broken on the sand. The wine helps. Vendors make sure your cup is never empty, and the more you drink, the easier it is to forget what you're really watching. The bitterness in your mouth is nothing compared to the bitterness of life outside, and for a few hours, you can pretend you're part of something grand, not just a spectator to misery. But when the show ends and you step back out into the city, the noise fades and the crowd thins. You're left with the memory of what you saw, and maybe a question you can't quite shake. How do you go back to ordinary life after watching someone's last moments play out in front of you? What does it do to you to see pain and death so close, so often? It's easy to think the dangers are left behind in the arena, but the truth is the real risks are waiting for you outside. In Rome, the next injury or illness could be just around the corner, and what passes for help might be more frightening than the show you just watched. You get a cut on your hand. Maybe it's from a slipped chisel at work or a scrape dodging a runaway cart on the street. At first, it's just annoying, but by the end of the week, your knuckles are stiff, the skin is hot and red, and every movement stings. In Rome, this is where your luck starts to run out, because medicine here is less a science and more a desperate roll of the dice. Roman healthcare is a strange mix of Greek ideas, superstition, and whatever your neighbor swears worked for their cousin last year. The big theory? Everything in your body comes down to 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you're sick, something's out of balance. The solution? Drain it. You walk into a doctor's shop, if you can call it that, and the first thing they reach for is a knife or a jar of leeches. Bloodletting is the answer to almost everything. Leeches are sometimes kept in vinegar to calm the patient, but really, it's just a distraction from what's coming next. Cupping is another favorite, leaving you with angry red circles and no guarantee you'll feel any better. Headache, fever, or just a bad mood. The odds are good you'll walk out lighter, at least in blood. And if you thought a cut was bad, try surgery. Roman surgeons have scalpels, forceps, bone drills, and a wild amount of confidence, but there's no anesthesia, not even a hint of it.
The only thing between you and agony is a block of wood to bite down on, and that's standard for everyone. The tools might look impressive, but they're never clean. If you're lucky, the surgeon wipes the blade on his toga before digging in. You grip the edge of a splintery table, eyes squeezed shut, and hope you don't pass out. Infection is almost a guarantee. No one knows about germs, and wounds are left open to the air. If the pain doesn't get you, the fever might.
The remedies on offer are a whole other gamble. Got an infection? Someone might smear animal dung on it. Or maybe a paste made from crushed beetles. The logic is murky at best. But the faith is strong. Honey is the rare exception. It actually helps, but you're just as likely to get a handful of something foul. Stomach trouble? Garlic and vinegar, if you can keep it down. If the remedies fail, you're not out of options, just out of hope. Sometimes when nothing else works, you look for help beyond the world of medicine. You might spend the night in a temple of Asclepius, praying for a healing dream. The temple is quiet, cool, and smells of incense. You lie on a stone bench with dozens of others, waiting for the god of healing to visit you in your sleep and whisper a cure. In the morning, the priest might offer a ritual or a new charm, but mostly, you're left with whatever comfort faith can bring. Even small injuries are risky. A splinter turns into an abscess, a fever spirals out of control, and there's no backup plan. If things get really bad, amputation is the last resort. No anesthesia, no sterile room, just a saw, a bucket, and a friend to hold you down while you bite the wood and scream. If you survive, you've lost a limb and probably your job. For most, that means no income and no way to feed your family. Roman culture doesn't make things easier. Stoicism is the ideal. Pain is just part of daily life, and complaining is frowned upon. You're expected to grit your teeth and keep going, even if your hand is swollen or your leg won't bend. Seeking help is a last resort, partly because the cure might be worse than the problem. People save their coins for food, not for doctors who might just shrug if things go wrong. Doctors themselves are a mixed bag. Some have real skill, but most are self-taught or learned from a scroll and a few grisly apprenticeships. There's no license, no guarantee. If you die, your family mourns, lights a candle, and life goes on. Sometimes neighbors gossip about omens or curses, but the doctor? He just takes on the next patient and wipes his hands on the same dirty cloth.
It's not that Romans didn't try. Their surgical tools are advanced for the time. Scalpels, forceps, bone drills, all laid out in neat rows. But the lack of knowledge about infection, the absence of pain relief, and the casual approach to hygiene make every procedure a risk. Surgeons work fast because the longer you're on the table, the more likely you are to bleed out or go into shock. There are stories of people surviving, but just as many who don't. And even if you live, the wound might never heal right. Most people just hope their bodies can handle what the city throws at them. They bandage what they can, ignore what they must, and trust that time, or the gods, will do what medicine can't. The line between life and death is thin, and everyone knows it. A cough, a fever, a simple cut. Any of these can be the start of a slow decline. If you're lucky, you recover. If not, there's little anyone can do. The doctor shrugs, the priest prays, and your family prepares for the worst. Even the strongest aren't safe. In Rome, everyone gambles with their health, and the house almost always wins. But if you think a bad doctor is terrifying, just imagine what happens when you end up on the wrong side of the law. Because in Rome, the rules aren't just strict. They're designed to keep you in your place. And the results can be even more brutal than anything the surgeons can dish out. You think you've survived the worst Rome can throw at you. But there's another layer to daily life that's even harder to navigate: the Roman justice system. Justice here doesn't mean what you might hope. It means knowing exactly where you stand and how quickly things can turn ugly if you're on the wrong side of the law. In Rome,
Your fate after a crime depends entirely on your status. Citizens, non-citizens, and slaves all faced punishment, but the severity and style were anything but equal. Let's break it down. Roman citizens, at least on paper, had certain protections. You couldn't be flogged in public unless you'd really managed to offend someone with a lot of pull. If you were condemned, the worst you usually faced was decapitation, and only after a formal trial. It sounds almost civilized, until you realize that having the right friends or enough money could tip the scales even further in your favor. Wealth and connections mattered more than any written law. If you had neither, the protections of citizenship felt pretty thin. Non-citizens had it rougher. The law might give them a trial, but the punishments were faster, harsher, and always public. Branding was common. A hot iron pressed to your skin, marking you for life as a thief or fraud. For stealing, you could lose a hand, or have your hands broken so you'd never steal again. Sometimes, the authorities skipped the warnings and went straight for execution. For non-citizens and slaves, convicted of serious crimes, crucifixion was the ultimate threat. A slow, humiliating death outside the city gates, meant to terrify everyone who saw it. Would you risk being branded or worse for a few stolen loaves? Most people didn't. For slaves, the system was even more brutal. Slaves weren't people in the eyes of the law. They were property. If a slave killed their master, Roman law didn't just punish the guilty party. Every slave in the household could be executed, no matter their involvement. This wasn't about justice. It was about control. The message was clear. Property mattered more than people, and the law existed to protect the powerful.
Roman punishments weren't just severe. They were public. Trials happened in the forum, with crowds gathering to watch. It wasn't a quiet affair. Lawyers, if you could afford one, performed for the audience as much as for the judge. The whole thing was theater. Shouting, speeches, clever twists. Verdicts were handed down with a flourish, and the punishments that followed were meant to be seen. Flogging, branding, exile, even death. These weren't private moments. They were staged to show everyone what happened if you broke the rules. Crucifixion stood out as Rome's most infamous punishment, reserved for non-citizens, slaves, and anyone the state wanted to make an example of. It was designed for maximum pain and humiliation. Victims were nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to die slowly, sometimes over days, in full view of the public. The message was as clear as it was cruel. Challenge the state or threaten social order, and your suffering would be a warning to everyone else. Other punishments were just as creative. Thieves could be branded, their hands broken, or exiled if they were lucky. Liars might have their tongues pierced, a mark that followed them for life. Fraud could lead to a public flogging or banishment, depending on who you'd fooled and how much they cared. Insult the emperor, and you wouldn't get a slap on the wrist. Treason was dealt with swiftly and often with a gruesome twist. Death by any method that sent a message. The system didn't care about rehabilitation. It wanted fear, obedience, and order. And if the law didn't break you, the city watch might simply look the other way. The vigiles, Rome's version of police and firefighters, were supposed to keep order. In reality, they were overworked, underpaid, and easily swayed by a few coins. Minor crimes might be ignored if the right bribe was offered. The rich and powerful could buy their way out of trouble, while the poor and powerless faced the full force of the law. Justice wasn't just brutal. It was inconsistent, and everyone knew it.
The flexibility of Roman justice was perhaps its most cynical feature. Laws bent or snapped depending on who was involved. If you had influence, you could twist the rules to your advantage. If you didn't, you were at the mercy of those who did. The emperor himself was above reproach. Insult him, and you could disappear overnight. The punishments for disrespecting authority weren't just severe, they were designed to keep everyone in their place. The system thrived on fear, and it worked. People learned quickly to keep their heads down and their loyalties clear. Everyday crimes were met with a level of force that would seem extreme by modern standards. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might be flogged so badly you'd carry the scars for life. Get caught lying, and a pierced tongue would make sure everyone knew what you'd done. Fraud, exile, mutilation, the list went on, always with the same goal: to deter, to control, to make examples. The law didn't care about fairness. It cared about order and about making sure those at the top stayed there. For most people, justice in Rome wasn't a shield, it was a threat. The wealthy and connected could bend the rules. The rest just tried to survive without attracting the wrong kind of attention. Trials weren't about truth or innocence. They were about power, hierarchy, and keeping the machinery of the empire running smoothly. So, next time you grumble about a parking ticket or a slow-moving court case, remember this: in Rome, even a small mistake could turn into a public spectacle, and the consequences were always harsher for those at the bottom. The law was a tool for the powerful, and everyone else just had to hope they stayed out of its way. But even if you managed to avoid the courts, there was another set of rules you couldn't ignore. In Rome, religion wasn't just a matter of personal belief. It was a public duty, woven into every part of daily life. And failing to honor those obligations could be just as dangerous as breaking the law.
Everywhere you turn in Rome, religion is right there with you, etched into the city's stones, woven into the rhythm of your day, and impossible to ignore. You can't walk 5 paces without crossing a shrine, stepping over a faded offering, or catching a whiff of incense. Public rituals are as common as bread lines, and skipping them isn't just a personal choice. It's a public statement, one people notice. The expectation is clear: you participate or you risk standing out in all the wrong ways. The most important ritual of all: worshiping the emperor. This isn't some optional once-a-year gesture. The emperor is more than a ruler. He's a living god, and you're expected to show respect in ways both large and small. At public altars and even at the little household shrines called lararia, you offer incense for his health and glory. Sometimes it's just a pinch of powder on a flame. Other times it's a full ceremony in the middle of a crowded square, but always someone's watching. Could you risk being called impious by skipping a single offering? In Rome, the answer is no. It's not just about the emperor, though. The Roman calendar is packed with religious festivals, dozens every year, each one shutting down normal life for a day or more. The city transforms, markets close, processions fill the streets, and the scent of roasting meat and incense hangs in the air. You see priests in their finest robes, families lining up at temples, and everyone, from the richest senator to the poorest laborer, joining in. Take the Festival of Juno, for example. The entire neighborhood might turn out to parade through the streets, singing and carrying flowers, before crowding into the temple for offerings. You don't have to believe in the gods to join in, but you do have to be seen. Participation is the point. Miss one of these festivals, or even just look distracted during a sacrifice, and you'll feel the eyes turn your way. The pressure to conform is everywhere. People whisper, they nudge each other, and suddenly you're the one everyone's watching. The risk isn't just social. If the wrong person notices, or if rumors start to spread, you could be accused of impiety, or worse, of being disloyal to the emperor himself. In a city where loyalty is everything, that's not a charge you want to face.
Religious duty doesn't stop at the big public events. It follows you home, into your kitchen, your bedroom, even the corners of your crumbling apartment. Every family keeps a lararium, a tiny shrine to the household gods. Before you eat, before you leave for work, before you do anything important, you make a small offering, bread, salt, wine, whatever you can spare. If you're lucky, you have a little incense to burn. And yes, the emperor gets his due here too. The ritual isn't about what you feel, it's about what you do. The gods and your neighbors care more about the gesture than your private doubts. That's the thing about Roman religion. It's all about action. Faith is optional, but ritual is mandatory. You don't have to believe Jupiter is watching, but you do have to show up when the priest calls for a sacrifice. You don't have to love the emperor, but you better be seen tossing incense in his honor. The right ritual, done at the right time, is what keeps you safe. It's what keeps your family safe. Skip it, and you're not just tempting fate, you're tempting the wrath of the community. This focus on ritual means everyone plays along, whether they want to or not. Foreigners, slaves, and travelers all take part in public ceremonies. Maybe you keep your own gods in secret, but in public, you light the incense and bow with everyone else. The state expects it. The crowd expects it. If you refuse, you're marked as an outsider, someone who can't be trusted, someone who doesn't belong. For most, the risk isn't worth it. The pressure is real. You feel it every time you pass a shrine, every time a festival halts your plans, every time a neighbor glances over to see if you're making the right gesture. It's not just about fitting in. In Rome, failing to honor the gods or the emperor can bring real consequences. Social isolation is just the start. If you're accused of impiety, you could face interrogation, trial, or worse. The line between religious duty and political loyalty is thin, and it's easy to cross without meaning to.
This is why new religious movements like Christianity cause such a stir. Christians refuse to offer incense to the emperor or join in the public rites. It wasn't just about faith. It was about refusing to take part in the rituals that kept Rome running. To the authorities, that looked like rebellion, a threat to the order that held the empire together. The result was suspicion, persecution, and sometimes violence. The system wasn't built for dissent. It was built for unity, for conformity, for visible public piety. You can't escape it. Shrines and temples fill every corner of the city, reminders of what's expected. The gods are everywhere, and so is the emperor's image, on coins, in statues, in the rituals that mark every important moment. You light the incense, say the words, and hope you've done enough. Most days, you don't think about it. It's just another part of life, like buying bread or dodging carts. But it's always there, shaping how you move, how you act, how you survive. So you go through the motions day after day. You join the crowds at the festivals, you offer your prayers at the lararium, and you never skip the incense for the emperor. Anything less is unthinkable. In Rome, public worship is survival, and conformity is the only real protection you have. But as the day winds down and the last traces of incense drift away, something shifts in the city's mood. The rituals end, the crowds thin, and the sun sinks behind the rooftops. Rome doesn't sleep, but it does change. When darkness falls, the city's dangers take over, and the rules of survival shift all over again.
When night falls in Rome, you feel it right away. The city that never really quiets down just gets darker, stranger, and a lot more dangerous. The alleys and winding streets you know by heart in the daylight turn into a maze where every shadow feels like a threat. There are no streetlights, just a sliver of moon, the rare flicker from an oil lamp in a window. and whatever you can remember from daytime. If you're lucky, you might have your own torch, but most people just rely on blind hope and quick steps to get home. You step outside and the air feels different. It's colder, and every sound stands out. A murmur from a tavern door, the clatter of a dropped jug, a low voice in an alley. You hear a twig snap. Is it a thieving hand or just a stray dog? You keep your head down, clutch your tunic tighter, and try not to make eye contact with anyone who looks like they belong out here after dark. If you have to go out, you don't carry anything shiny, and you definitely don't wander alone. Most Romans know better than to test their luck at night. But if you're one of the unlucky ones who has to be out, you're not alone. Thieves, cut purses, and pickpockets treat the moonlight like a hunting license. They slip through the crowds outside taverns, fingers quick and eyes always watching. The darkness is their cover, and the city's maze of alleys is their home turf. The advice is simple: move fast, keep your valuables hidden, and hope the only thing you lose is a coin or two.
The vigiles, the city's night watch, are supposed to keep things under control. In theory, they patrol the streets, break up fights, and watch for fires. In reality, they're overworked, underpaid, and just as likely to be found napping in a doorway as chasing down a thief. Sometimes you hear the clang of their bucket brigades or the ringing of a bell as they try to summon help for a blaze, but more often their presence is just enough to make you hope, never enough to make you feel safe. Criminals know this. They time their moves for when the vigiles are out of sight, and if you get robbed, chances are you'll never see your purse again. But crime isn't the only thing that keeps people up at night. Fires are a constant gnawing fear. The insulae, those towering wooden tenements where most Romans live, are basically tinderboxes stacked sky high. One overturned lamp, one careless cook, and suddenly the whole block is crackling with flames. The vigiles rush in, forming bucket lines, but they're fighting a losing battle with water sloshing from pails and nothing but desperation on their side. Sometimes you hear the shouts, the frantic pounding of feet on stairs, the crash of pottery as families scramble to save what little they own. If you live near the top, your only escape is a rickety staircase, and you hope it holds long enough to get you to the street. Inside those same insulae, peace is rare. Even if the fire skips your building, the walls are so thin you hear everything: rats scratching, neighbors coughing, babies wailing, couples fighting, and sometimes a scream that makes you wonder if you should check or just keep your door bolted. Vermin scurry through the walls, and the city's chaos leaks in through every crack. Sleep is a gamble. You might drift off for an hour, only to be jolted awake by shouting or the distant crackle of flames.
If you venture out, the taverns are where the city's pulse throbs loudest. Cheap wine flows, and the air is thick with smoke and bad poetry. One wrong glance or careless bump, and a dice game explodes into yelling. Maybe a gladiator, off-duty and half-drunk, decides you looked at him wrong. Fists fly. Someone gets shoved into a table and the whole room turns into a blur of swinging arms and spilled drinks. The crowd either eggs it on or slips outside before the vigiles show up. If you're unlucky, you're caught in the middle, hoping to escape before things get worse. Women alone after dark face even steeper odds. Rome isn't kind to anyone wandering solo, but for women, the risk is higher. There's little protection, and the city's night belongs to those who move in packs or know how to disappear quickly. Most keep to their homes, bolting doors and hoping the noise outside passes by. Now and then, you catch a glimpse of something different, a torchlit religious procession, chanting and carrying offerings to ward off whatever evil the city's whispering about that week. For a moment, the street feels safer, lit by moving flames and the hum of voices. But as soon as the last torch rounds the corner, the dark closes in again. Temples offer some shelter, but trust in the gods only goes so far when the city outside never really sleeps. Advice for surviving the Roman night is simple. Don't linger, don't draw attention, and never let your guard down. If you're out, keep moving. If you're inside, hope that your door and your luck hold until morning. The city's dangers don't hide. They wait, just out of sight, for anyone who forgets how quickly things can go wrong.
Looking at the world the Romans built, you have to wonder, could you last just a week in this relentless world? Most of us, used to cool air on demand or popping an antibiotic for a cut, would be out by day one. The grime, the grind, and the constant threats would wear you down fast. Yet for the Romans, this was just life. Their resilience and stubborn will to keep moving shaped an empire that still leaves its mark on us today. It wasn't gold that held it together. It was sweat, fear, ambition, and the daily push to survive. If you found this journey eye-opening, let me know in the comments, and rest well tonight.